Learning assessment through backward design usage moves students away from the traditional practice. To think like an assessor requires a different way of thinking. Prior to designing lessons, it didn't come naturally to or easily to many teachers. What did come more naturally was thinking like an activity designer or teacher once we have a target. That is, it was easier to unconsciously jump into the design of lessons, activities, and assignments without first asking ourselves what performances and products we need to teach toward. Backward design demands that we overcome this natural instinct and comfortable habit. Otherwise, our design is likely to be less coherent and focused. Thinking like an assessor boils down to a few basic questions. The first question is, what kinds of evidence do we need to find hallmarks of our goals, including that of understanding? Before we design a particular test or task, it is important to consider the general types of performances that are implied. For example, regardless of content, understanding is often revealed through the exercises of comparing and contrasting or summarizing key ideas. After mapping a general approach to assessment, we then develop the assessment particulars. The second question assumes that some particular task has been developed about which we then ask what specific characteristics in student responses, products, or performances should we examine to determine the extent to which the desired results were achieved? And this is where criteria, rubrics, and exemplars come into play. The third question has to do with a test for validity and reliability of the assessment. And it goes, does the proposed evidence enable us to infer a student's knowledge, skill, or understanding? And few teachers are in the habit of testing their designs once the assessment has been fleshed out, but such self testing is key to better results and to fairness. It is important to contrast between when thinking like an assessor and when thinking like an activity designer only, as we would do so in this current slide. So, when thinking like an assessor, what would be sufficient and revealing evidence of understanding? When thinking like an activity designer only, given the goals that performance tasks must anchor the unit and focus the instructional work. When thinking like an assessor, what are the different types of evidence required by stage one desired results? When thinking like an activity designer, against what criteria will we appropriately consider work and assess its level of quality? When thinking like an assessor, did the assessments reveal and distinguish those who really understood from those who only seemed to? Am I clear on the reasons behind learner mistakes? When thinking like an activity designer only, what would be the fun and interesting activities on this topic? And so, a basic requirement of assessing for understanding is that we need to know the learner's thought processes along with their answers or solutions. Their explanation of why they did what they did, their support for the approach or response, and their reflection on the results that we may gain fuller insight into their degree of understanding. Designing around problems, not just exercises, means shifting learning assessment from memorization to meaningful application. Instead of asking students to repeat steps or recall isolated facts, educators present authentic real world problems that require analysis, decision making, and creativity. This approach measures how learners think, adapt, and apply knowledge in complex situations. It mirrors how skills are used outside the classroom, encouraging deeper understanding and long term retention. Assessments become evidence of reasoning, problem solving, and transfer of learning, not just correctness. By focusing on problems, educators evaluate true competence, preparing learners to navigate uncertainty, collaborate effectively, and perform successfully in real life professional and academic contexts. Traditional test or real world application. In order to get at the root of designing around problems and not just exercises, we must decide if what we are designing is just a traditional test or does it have real world application. With traditional tests, there can be shortcomings and cause teachers and students to fall short of the stated objectives. Traditional test taking often rewards memorization, eluding actual understanding. Test taking alone can be student specific without benefiting students who may learn differently. Finally, test taking can be temporary with information lasting only until information for the next test needs to be memorized. With real world application, teachers are able to assess a student's ability to take the knowledge received and prove an understanding of what to do with it. It deems critical thinking and learning transfer as more valuable than memorization. It favors ability to problem solve over information recall. In professional football, players enter the league with a knowledge of how the game of football is played. However, professional football is different and requires a certain level of understanding in order to be successful. Coaches are presented with a challenge of how to bring new players into their existing plays and scheme. It's one thing to regurgitate the name of a play and the responsibilities associated with it, and it's another thing to understand the play in a way that a player can make adjustments in real time based on what the opposing team is doing while remaining true to the original responsibilities of the play called by their coach. Coaches often have to alter the play based on the player's understanding. Memorization alone in this world isn't enough. The ability to apply understanding is required for success. There are six facets of understanding. They are explanation, interpretation, application, perspective, empathy, and self knowledge. With explanation, an explanation asks students to tell the big idea in their words and make connections to show their work, explain their reasoning, and induce a theory from data. With interpretation, this requires the student to make sense of stories, artworks, data, situations, or claims. Interpretation also involves translating ideas, feelings, or work done in one medium into another. With application, the students who understand can use their knowledge and skill in new situations. Place emphasis on application in authentic context with a real or simulated audience, purpose, setting, constraints, or background noise. With perspective, a perspective is demonstrated when the student can see things from different points of view, articulate their other side of the case, see the big picture, recognize underlying assumptions, and take a critical stance. With empathy, intellectual imagination is essential to understanding, and it manifests itself not only in the arts and literature, but more generally through the ability to appreciate people who think and act differently from us. The goal is not to have students accept the ways of others, but to help them better understand the diversity of thought and feeling in the world. That is, to develop their capacity to walk in someone else's shoes. In this way, students can avoid stereotyping and learning how yesterday's weird idea can be commonplace today. And finally, with self knowledge, it is important to require students to self assess their past as well as their present work. It is only through self assessment that we may gain the most complete insight into how sophisticated and accurate students' views are of the task, the criteria, and standards they are to master. Fig Jam is an online whiteboard where possibilities turn into plans. Teachers can facilitate collaborative group learning while encouraging active participation from students. It's best suited for classroom discussions, brainstorms, and group work.